What is up, my fellow wizards, and welcome to another episode of Building EDH. Today we're going to be talking about Zaxara, the Exemplary. Zaxara is a 4-drop Sultai Nightmare Hydro commander with Death Touch. Taps to add 2 mana of any one color. Whenever you cast a spell with X in its mana cost, create a 0/0 green Hydro creature token, then put X +1/+1 counters on it. A lot of people like to go with the Hydro Tribal strategy or the +1/+1 counter strategy. This deck is going to be Elf Tribal. The goal of the elves are to generate all of the mana that Zaxara needs to cast all of those X mana spells that are going to be winning you the game. So without further ado, let's get into the deck. Starting with the instants, we have Return of the Wild Speaker. So you can choose one, draw cards equal to the highest power among non-human creatures you control. These are primarily going to be your Hydras for this, and non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn if you need that extra buff. Next we have Mystical Tutor. You can search your library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal that card, put it on top of your library. Zaxara is going to be wanting X spells left and right. This is going to get the X spell that you need to win the game. Vitalize. So untap all creatures you control. You're going to have a lot of elves that are going to be tapping and untapping in this deck, Zaxara included. So this is just going to get you there quicker. Elven Ambush. Create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token for each elf you control. Doubles your elves. Elves can tap for mana. Fantastic in this deck. Going up with Golgari Charm. Again, whenever you're going to build a deck that's going to have a lot of tokens or a lot of creatures in general, you want to be able to protect them. Golgari Charm is my go-to for that. Next up we have Reclaim. Put target card from a graveyard on top of your library. Anytime any of your important combo pieces or any important piece to you at the time is gone, you can get it right back. Druid's Deliverance. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you this turn and then populate. This is going to make an additional elf if you have any elf tokens in play on top of acting as a fog effect. Autumn's Veil for some protection. Spells you control can't be countered by blue or black spells this turn. Getting some counters in there. We are running blue, so let's take advantage while we can. Swan Song. Counter target enchantment or instant or sorcery spell. Its controller puts a 2/2 blue bird creature token with flying into play. Pact of Negation. Counter target spell. At the beginning of your next upkeep, you can pay 5. If you don't, you lose the game. Otherwise, this is free. Free counter spell in a pinch, always useful. Good old reliable counter spell. Simply counter target spell. Then Dispel. When you're about to go off, you want to be able to counter anything that anybody can do, and if it's your turn, instant speed's the only way they can do it. 1 mana says, nope, sorry. Next up, Corrosive Grip. It's got split second, and it destroys target artifact or enchantment. Next we have Doomblade. Doomblade, destroy target non-black creature. So we got Drown in Dreams. You can choose one. If you control a commander and you cast the spell, you may choose both. Target player draws X cards, target player mills twice X cards. So if you can go infinite with Zaxara, this is a great way to knock out 2 opponents at once. One person's going to be drawing their entire deck while the other person mills it. These next round of X spells are the primary game enders in the deck. Mind Grind. Each opponent reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals X land cards, then puts all cards revealed this way into his or her graveyard. X can't be 0. So again, our primary goal in Zaxara is to get infinite mana as soon as possible. This is a great way to end the game with that. Torment of Hellfire. Repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. Exsanguinate. Each opponent loses X life, you gain life equal to the life lost this way. If they lose infinite, you gain infinite. Isn't that fantastic? I think so. Profane Command. Choose 2. Target player loses X life. Return target creature card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Target creature gets -X until end of turn, or up to X target creatures gain fear until end of turn. I primarily like using the first effect. Target player loses X life. It doesn't kill all of your opponents, but it's a great way to get one person that's a high threat down. Agadeem's Awakening. Return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creature cards that each have a different converted mana cost X or less. This is good for the mid to late game if somebody's been getting rid of all of your elves that produce a lot of mana. Get them all back. Wait till next turn. It's usually going to be the game at that point. Finale of Eternity. Destroy up to 3 target creatures with toughness X or less. If X is 10 or more, return all creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Once again, just a way to get back all of your cheap elves that are going to be gaining you a bunch of mana throughout the game. If someone's going to waste their removal getting rid of your stuff, then one card's going to get it all back. Villainous Wealth, a staple in any Sultai deck that's going to be gaining a lot of mana. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. You may cast any number of spells with converted mana cost X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. Curse of the Swine. Exile X target creature cards. For each creature exiled this way, its controller puts a 2/2 green boar creature token onto the battlefield. You're going to get rid of all of your opponent's threats, and they're just going to be pigs now. Sylvan Offering. Choose an opponent. You and that player put an XX green treefolk creature token onto the battlefield. You can choose an opponent. You and that player each put X/1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens onto the battlefield. This is a very good political card if somebody is the arch enemy, a great way for you to build your army of elves while also making sure that whoever's in the lead can slowly get back down to base. Ingaruk's Wake. You're going to be making a lot of mana in this deck, so this is a Cyclonic Rift for destroying creatures. Every creature is destroyed except for yours. Windfall. This is going to be just a quick way to refill your hand. Maybe you don't have the exact cards you need. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. Rite of Replication. With a kicker of 5, you put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of target creature. If Rite of Replication was kicked, put 5 of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. You can use this against your opponent's creatures if they have something threatening, and now you have 5 of that creature. I primarily will use it on some of my elves that generate a lot of mana. A Priest of Titania would be a perfect target for this. Make 5 Priest of Titanias, that's an instant 10 mana per tap. Reveal the top X cards of your library, put all land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order with Animus Awakening. Spells Mastery. If there are 2 or more instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard, untap those lands. In this deck, that's not going to be hard to pull off. We have a lot of instants and sorceries in here. Explore, standard ramp card. You may play an additional land this turn and cantrips itself. Shamanic Revelation. Draw a card for each creature you control. You gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. Solve the Equation. A new card that came out in Strixhaven. Very undervalued in my opinion. You can search your library for any instant or sorcery card, reveal it, and put that card into your hand. Finale of Devastation. Search your library and or graveyard for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less and put it on the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. If X is greater than 10, creatures you control get +X/+X and gain haste until end of turn. This card is fantastic for winning the game if you're toward mid to late and you have a bunch of creatures in play. This is going to have a Crater Hoof effect for them. If you can't use Zaxara, you can always use Wirewood Channeler or some of the other cards that you're going to be seeing coming up in the creature section that can be used to make infinite mana. Most, if not all of them, are green. Finale Devastation is going to get him in play. Diabolic Revelation, the ultimate tutor card in this deck. Search your library for X cards and put those cards into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Really easy to get all of your combo pieces plus a couple of counters in there just to make sure that whenever you pull your combo off, it's going to win. Grim Tutor. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. You lose 3 life. Again, just to get that essential combo piece that you could be missing or anything that you need in a pinch. Demonic Tutor, the more efficient way to do it. Moving on to artifacts now, we got Soul Ring, standard tap 2, add 2 mana to your mana pool. Lightning Greaves, equipped creature gains haste and shroud. This is amazing when you're putting in a bunch of copies of Priest of Titania or anything else that's just now coming into play. If you have a Cryptolith right out and a bunch of tokens that just got summoned, they can all now tap for mana thanks to Lightning Greaves, moving them to each one. Elvish Guidance. Moving on to the enchantments. Whenever an enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds Forest to his or her mana pool for each elf in play. This is just Priest of Titania on an enchantment. Cryptolith Right, mentioned previously, creatures you control have tapped to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This makes all of your tokens tap for mana, including the Hydras that you're going to be making them useful for something other than blocking or attacking. Mana Bloom, a recent addition to this deck. Mana Bloom enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. Remove a charge counter from Mana Bloom. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Activate this ability only once each turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Mana Bloom has no charge counter on it, return it to your hand. This is going to be a reusable X spell for Zaxara to keep getting Hydras into play. It's also going to be used to dump mana into the next X spell you cast. Mystic Remora, staple in any blue deck. It's got a cumulative upkeep of 1, but whenever target opponent successfully casts a non-creature spell, you may draw a card, then that player may pay 4 to counter this effect. Doubling Season. This works wonders in this deck. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many tokens instead. An effect would put 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it puts twice that many counters on that permanent instead. Absolutely made for Zaxara. You're going to be making twice the amount of Hydras, twice the amount of Elves, and those Hydras are going to be coming in with twice the amount of counters. Double, 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 double. Alright, moving on to Unbound Flourishing. Again, a card that was just made for this deck. Whenever you cast a permanent spell with a mana cost containing X, double the value of X. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell or activate an ability, if that spell's mana cost or that ability activation cost contains X, copy that spell or ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. Freed from the Real. This is the glue that holds the deck together in terms of finding an instant win. Getting either Freed from the Real or Penman's Aura in your hand opening is going to cause a turn 4 to 5 win if you have the right ramp to get there. Tap an untapped creature you control, add a blue to your mana pool. You can tap Zaxara to add more blues, make infinite blue. Once you make infinite blue, you can make infinite green and infinite black. You can cast any of the X spells I previously mentioned for an absurd amount of mana, winning you the game. Moving on to the creatures finally, we're going to start out with the basic dorks, move on to the more advanced dorks, and you'll see them as they come. Starting with Elvish Mystic, tap to add a green. Elves of Deep Shadow, taps to add a black at the cost of 1 life. Llanowar Elves, again just to add a green. Paradise Druid, it's a 2-drop, but it adds 1 mana of any color and has hexproof as long as it's untapped. Urborg Elf, taps to add for any of our colors. Priest of Titania, one of the staples in this deck, taps to add a green to your mana pool for each elf on the battlefield. Marwyn the Nurturer. Whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Marwyn the Nurturer. Add an amount of forest equal to the Marwyn's power. The Marwyn. You heard me right. Wirewood Channeler. Wirewood Channeler can also go well with Penman's Aura and Freed from the Real. Taps to add X mana of any 1 color to your mana pool, where X is the number of elves in play. Elvish Archdruid, other elves you control get +1/+1. That's neither here nor there. What's important is that you can tap to add a forest for each elf you control. Circle of Dreams Druid came out in Midnight Hunt. This card is Gaia's Cradle on a creature, specifically an elf, which makes it the perfect include for this deck. Tap to add a green for each creature you control. Next up, we got Bloom Tender. For each color among permanents you control, add 1 mana of that color to your mana pool. So if we've got Zaxara in play, we're tapping this for Sultai. Bloom Tender can also be used to make infinite mana in Golgari, constantly using the blue from Freed from the Real or Penman's Aura. Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, yet another card that can be utilized with Penman's Aura and Freed from the Real. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if the power of the creature is the greatest among other creatures' power. So as long as you're creating a bunch of as long as you're casting a bunch of high-powered X spells, you're constantly going to be drawing cards after the big Hydras you're making. Pay a green, tap to add X mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Heritage Druid, only 1 drop. Tap 3 untapped elves you control to add 3 forests to your mana pool. I enjoy this card along with Birchlore Rangers. Tap 2 untapped elves you control, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool because these abilities work just for each other. If a bunch of tokens are out, if they were just summoned, haste is not a factor because the card's ability is what's tapping them, not them being tapped for themselves. So it's a great way to get a lot of mana into play really fast. Jorga, Tree Speaker, another 1-drop, pay 2 to level up, and when it levels up to level 1 through 4, you can add 2 forests to your mana pool. At level 5+, elves you control have tapped to add 2 mana to your mana pool. This includes the elf tokens that you can be making in this deck. Incubation Druid, the last of the creatures that can work well with Penman's Aura and Freed from the Real. You can tap to add 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. If Incubation Druid has a +1/+1 counter on it, add 3 mana of that type instead. Rishkar, Pima Renegade. When Rishkar Pima Renegade enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Each creature you control with a counter on it has tapped to add a green to your mana pool. This card is very synergetic in this deck because the Hydras that you're making are going to have counters on them. Rishkar makes them tap for a mana if you don't need to use them to attack or block. Coiling Oracle, a great thing to have in the early game. When it comes into play, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it into play. Otherwise, you put that card into your hand. So no matter what, you're going to get some card advantage from this. Sylvan Ranger, once again, really good to have in the early game. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Tireless Provisioner. It's got a landfall effect, and whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you can either create a food or a treasure token. We're primarily going to be making treasure tokens in this deck just to add to the mana pool. Beast Whisperer, it's an elf, and whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. That's why it's in this deck. Realm Walker, a great way to help get those elves off the top. Choose elf as your creature type. You can cast them from the top of your library. Quirion Ranger, it's an elf ranger. You return a forest you control to its owner's hand and untap target creature. Activate this ability only once each turn. A great way to untap Zaxara or any of your other big mana producing creatures. Seeker of Skybreak, untap target creature. Without the downside of having to do this once per turn, you can just tap this, retap a Priest of Titania or Zaxara or Selvala, anything that you have, and just make a bunch more mana. Copperhord Scout, I like to think of this as the double take card. The reason why I say that is because, say you have 2 X spells in your hand that you're ready to unleash. Don't tap any of your lands, just tap all of your creatures and cast the first spell. You can do this to bait out a counter spell that an opponent has, and if you're lucky, it'll go through. If you're not, that's fine. They'll counter that spell. You'll go to combat, you'll just attack with this, and it'll untap all the creatures you control. Hoping that all the counters are away from your opponent's hands, you can then cast the second X spell in your hand and win the game that way. Some people never see it coming. Tajuru Preserver. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents, so if anybody's trying to get you to remove all of your important combo pieces, this says nah. Lastly, we're moving on to the lands of this deck, starting out with Command Tower. We know it, we love it. Zagath Triome. It's a swamp, forest, and an island. Taps for all 3. Opulent Palace comes into play tapped. Taps for all 3. Exotic Orchard has the potential to tap for any of the 3. And we're moving on to duels. We got Simic Growth Chamber here. Golgari Rot Farm. Jungle Hollow. Giltleaf Palace, as this is an elf deck. Very synergetic there. Dismal Backwater. Bajuka Bog. Myriad Landscape, Evolving Wilds, Rogue's Passage. Put this in the deck just in case you have a Hydra that's just really, really big. They don't come with Trample or any other cool other abilities, so pay 4, target creature can't be blocked. If your X spells aren't working, that Hydra will. Wirewood Lodge comes into play untapped, always great. Taps to add a colorless mana, or you can pay a forest to untap target elf. Again, this is a great way to turn something that only produces 5 mana into producing 10 very, very quickly. Temple of the False God is our last utility of the deck. And then we are moving on to the basics. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 forests, 1, 2, 3, 4 swamps, and 1, 2, 3, 4 islands. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It's a great way to show your love and keep this dream of mine alive. All my socials are linked in the description below if you want to follow me and keep up to date with everything EDH outside of YouTube. If you're thinking about making this deck or just want to use it for inspiration, I've included a link to the deck list below as well. Thanks again for watching, and stay foil.